Welcome, I'm Krista Campbell. Before we get started, I would like to encourage you to ask questions. You can post your questions in the questions dialog box at any time during the webinar. We will have time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. This webinar is being recorded and will be available online. It takes about a week, maybe a little more, before this will be posted. You can look for the link to the webinar location in the GoToWebinar follow-up email. There's also a survey that's going to launch at the end of the webinar. Please take a few minutes to answer the survey questions. This is going to help our team continue to build content that's useful for you. It's going to provide us with some more understanding of where you're at with the utility network. Also, I've included a white paper, Understanding the Utility Network, a guide for water utilities, as a handout. You can download it anytime during the webinar. So let's get started. Thank you for joining us today for Introduction to the Utility Network for Water Utilities. In today's webinar, you will learn how the utility network supports your need for a real-world model of your water system. Presenters will discuss the ArcGIS Utility Network Management extension, the utility network configuration, and provide resources to help you get started. We will also have demonstrations showing the basic modeling functionality and data structure of the utility network. We're going to start with a poll today. If you just take a few minutes to answer the question, I would appreciate it. What is your understanding of the utility network? Just became aware, beginning to understand, general high-level understanding, have a good understanding. It'd be great if all of you could take a second to choose the answer that's best describing your understanding. What is your understanding of the utility network? You just became aware of it, you're beginning to understand it, you have a general or high-level understanding, or you have a good understanding of the utility network. All right, it looks like about half of you are beginning to understand, 28% are just becoming aware, and about 10% have a good understanding. Thank you. Water team members joining me today are Jason Channon and Matt Groves. Both are solution engineers that have been helping our customers to understand and get started with the utility network. Jason is a senior solution engineer specializing in Esri solutions for water, wastewater, and stormwater management. His responsibilities include technical leadership, building and delivering industry-specific applications, maps, and tools. Jason works closely with Esri customers and partners in the water industry to assess individual agencies' needs and ensure their success using the ArcGIS platform. Matt has been with Esri for 6 years. Previous to being a solution engineer, Matt was a course author for Esri's training services department, where he authored courses focusing on the water utility industry, mobile GIS, and the utility network. Before his time at Esri, Matt worked for 10 years at a large engineering and architecture firm applying GIS to support a variety of environmental projects. Jason, let's get started.
Thank you, Krista. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. I want to thank you for taking out some time from your day to learn about the utility network. When we're talking about the utility network, we're really talking about capabilities that are enabled through the ArcGIS Utility Network Management extension. And this is an extension to ArcGIS Enterprise. It was first available starting at version 10.6, and now we're in our current version of 10.7.1. Esri built this technology really to respond to a growing need within our utility community to better model complex utility networks. And this is in part driven by the need for connecting our networks up through IoT and creating much more smarter networks. So the utility network offers us the ability to model in much more detail, right? We can detailed model those individual sensors and devices that are connecting to IoT. It also provides us the ability to do much better visualization and analytical capabilities, giving utilities the ability to really understand in real time what's going on with their network. And then lastly, it enables pervasive access across an entire utility organization. And this is really different from the previous approach that we had of the geometric network and using ArcMap. That was really much more of a client database-centric approach to managing utility asset information. With the utility network, it really embraces WebGIS and exposes this capability across an entire organization. And all of this really is helping our utility customers to build a foundation for modernizing their infrastructure and creating smarter networks. So when we talk about modeling the complete network, we're really talking about distribution, collection, and conveyance systems within water utilities. And we're being able to model things like network controllers. These are devices that control the flow of resource in and out of the pipe network. And we can do what's called terminal configurations that can actually configure that flow and get really sophisticated in that approach. And we'll learn a little bit more about that later on. The utility network also provides the ability to have much better connectivity with a whole set of connectivity rules that can be applied to the utility network to define how features actually interact in the real world. Previously, we would have to model that connectivity with coincident geometry. Now, through the utility network, we can actually utilize things called associations. So not every feature has to be geometrically coincident in order to actually be physically connected. We can also look at modeling things like containment, and this enables us to go inside of very complex structures like pump stations and be able to model the inner workings of those structures, all of the devices like the fittings and the individual lines, the pumps, the meters, and the valves that participate inside that complex structure. You can also start to model things like the electric network that also powers that particular structure. And all of this is available for electric, gas, water, and wastewater and stormwater utilities through what we call asset packages. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail about those later. The utility network really enables business workflows across an entire utility organization. Now, we've been able to put utility infrastructure information into maps for quite some time now, but our maps are getting much more smarter, and they're also tied into schematic diagrams. So now with the utility network, you can work side by side with a map and a schematic diagram, both tied into the same data, the same information. And this will really enable engineering workflows. I mentioned the component views and containment. We can now go inside of those structures and be able to do better asset management by being able to model in GIS all of the features that participate in the network. We also have the ability to do very advanced analytics, and this is done in part through what we call subnetworks. Subnetworks enable us to further define the network into smaller geographies. For water, those are things like pressure zones or DMA areas, a district metered area, to start to understand and define water loss. The utility network also enables us to have historical and planned views. So you can roll back to a certain point in time and see what the network looked like at that particular moment. You can also look at what the network will look like in the future based on planned out development. And the utility network works also in 3D. And so this supports really everybody throughout a utility organization and their daily workflows. The utility network enables utilities to start to solve very complex problems. By looking at things like DMAs, utilities can start to understand and really get a handle on things like water loss, being able to plug in information from real-time systems, consumption information, and then analyze that at a smaller geography. It makes it much easier to start to dissect complex problems. The utility network also enables us to start to do reporting on asset inventory by those subnetworks. So the utility can look at, how many linear feet of certain types of pipe do we have across our pressure zones and compare those to each other. The utility network also enables very sophisticated tracing capabilities to do upstream, downstream, or isolation type traces. And these aren't just pre-configured traces anymore. Really what we've done is we've exposed a whole tracing framework for utilities to start to build out their own complex traces, to be able to define what participates in the trace, and also what information you want to get back from the trace. And all of this starts to help utilities to gain better understanding and solving challenges that exist in the water industry. The utility network also enables real-time sharing and collaboration across an organization. Now this starts with ArcGIS Desktop and specifically ArcGIS Pro, which is a connected desktop. That's still going to be the primary environment in which users will interact with the utility network. That's where they'll manage and maintain. They'll also do sophisticated analysis with the utility network inside of desktop. But now, because it embraces WebGIS, we can start to expose some of those same capabilities and functionality across the web. So users in the organization don't necessarily have to be well-versed in Pro to start taking advantage of things like tracing. And that also extends out into the field. So users can take utility network information out into the field using mobile applications and use that information in their decision support as they're doing real work out in the field. An example of this might be a device status change. So when field crews are out in the field and they're responding to maintenance activities or water outages and things like that, they may need to close a valve. And so they can make that change on the map, and that change to that device persists across all the other maps in the organization. So others using that information in ArcGIS Desktop will know that that valve is closed. So when they run their analysis, that can be taken into effect. Users on the web who are simply answering questions throughout the day about the utility, about status of things, can also have that view and understand that that valve is closed at the present moment. Likewise, when the crews turn that valve back on, that change persists and is made across all of the other maps. And this lets everybody in the organization have a real-time, up-to-date view into the network and understand what's going on. The utility network for utilities is going to be a really integral component to the ArcGIS mapping and GIS platform. And there will be many people within the organization that interact with and use the utility network. On the IT and GIS side, administrators will use the utility network. They'll actually manage the information in the network. They'll manage the database, the security of all of that. Organizations might have application developers or are leveraging partner solutions that expose the utility network to everybody else in the organization to be able to ask questions for maps. Still at the heart of all of this is editors and using ArcGIS Pro to build and maintain the utility network on an ongoing basis. Office staff will be using utility network information in their maps to support their work, as well as field personnel out in the field doing inspections and maintenance activities, having the utility network information as a decision support tool. And Esri has applications across all of these different areas that are designed to support users in utilizing the utility network. So the utility network really is a foundational piece, just like base maps and other information coming from real-time systems, all combined together to form a complete GIS system. And of course, this is interoperable with all of the other business systems that utilities are used to interacting with and using on a daily basis. The utility network was built to align with industry visions and requirements. There is a wealth of utilities right now that are going through this modernization, upgrading their infrastructure, trying to integrate location in with their smart networks so that they can have a real-time view of what's going on operationally within the utility. And this is all done using real-world design, using data models that were built to specifically utilize this information and be able to model down to the detail necessary to achieve that. All of this lends to better asset management across the board. Aligning with best practices and industry standards, organizations will be able to achieve much better asset management through using the utility network. And then this is also interoperable because the utility network is a services-based approach to serving out the information. It will become possible to spatially enable many other business systems and bring that network capability into other business systems. And this is really building a platform not only for today for utilities, but also for the future. Utilities are able to future-proof some of their utility information and being able to leverage the power of the utility network as technology begins to and continues to evolve. I want to take a look at just some of the key differentiators, some of the things that are different about the utility network from our previous approach with using the geometric network or some of the other things that might be out there in the market. Now, the utility network is really the first true cross-platform supported network management system, and it uses an updated network model. We've talked a little bit about connectivity associations, being able to model the way things behave in the real world without forcing them to be geometrically connected, as well as those containment associations and being able to look inside of complex structures and model the inner workings of those structures. We also have the ability to create multiple terminal configurations on devices to be able to understand the flow of a resource in and out of those devices. I mentioned earlier the expanded tracing framework. This is really going to allow utilities to get sophisticated in their approach to understanding the network and tracing and returning information from the network, as well as built-in support for network diagrams, being able to work inside of those schematics alongside of traditional GIS maps. Now, we've also enhanced the editing experience. Now, this is largely due in part to ArcGIS Pro in taking advantage of expanded feature template models. And Matt's going to show a little bit about this later on. And this support for assemblies or collections of features. So you can actually lay down an entire collection of features that's predefined without having to go in and simply digitize each individual feature and fill out all the attributes. You can define this ahead of time and really streamline the editing process. And this also ties into snapping based on connectivity rules. So the idea is that we're enforcing these connectivity rules and trying to get the information in correctly the first time as it's input in by editors. The utility network, as I mentioned, is a services-based architecture, fully supporting WebGIS. And it also leverages an updated transaction model. And that's what enables us to look at historical change tracking, what's been done to the network over the years. And this is really more flexible with less overhead than some of the traditional versioning approaches that you might be used to. And the last thing I want to talk about is this idea of the attribute rule framework. And this is really powerful. This provides cross-platform scripting capabilities using Arcade to be able to update and input information via scripts at runtime. So an example of this might be when you take a pipe out of service and you mark it as abandoned, you might want some additional attributes to change, such as pressure. There would not be any pressure inside that pipe if it's marked as abandoned. Another example is updating asset IDs. You can use the attribute rule framework to keep track incrementally of the numeric system or the numbers that you're using to update your asset IDs. Now, I want to quickly cover what the architecture of the utility network looks like. Now, the utility network as it is today requires that you have ArcGIS Enterprise. And really that means a base deployment of ArcGIS Enterprise. For those of you who may not be familiar with what that means, the base deployment consists of your portal, a hosting server that really powers everything, a data store to store some of the data layers, and a couple of web adapters that enable access into the system. Now, this also requires that you have an enterprise geodatabase. That is where your utility network will ultimately live, is inside of these enterprise geodatabase. And then the functionality is exposed through servers and through services. And really what we recommend is that you have a separate GIS server to power the utility network, and that you license the utility network management extension on that GIS server or those GIS servers. And this enables you to scale out the needs for the utility network differently than you might scale out your ArcGIS Enterprise. Now let's take a look at conceptually what this looks like. For me, the utility network really boils down to four things. It's that ArcGIS Enterprise base deployment that I just talked about. And then it's the configuration of both the utility network itself and then the asset package, which is what makes the utility network behave like a real-world resource network, like a water distribution, a sewer collection, or a stormwater system. And so you'll spend some time configuring the asset package to your organization's specific needs. Once that's done, Then you publish out the services that will ultimately be used through the web applications across your organization. And when we're talking about the services, we're talking about the feature service. That's what provides view, query, and edit capabilities. The utility service, which is what manages the topology across the network. The geoprocessing framework for being able to do tracing, and that rule-based editing. And then versioning is also exposed through the service. That's the branch versioning that we talked about, as well as network diagrams, being able to expose that functionality and capability through services in WebGIS as well. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, and Matt's going to walk us through, using ArcGIS Pro, what the utility network really looks like.
Okay, thanks, Jason. And hello, everyone. So I'm just going to take a few minutes here to walk through some of the basic data structure, modeling capabilities, and analysis tools that are available with the utility network. So to begin, here we are in ArcGIS Pro, and we're in the Water Distribution Editor Solution Map. So this is available through our solution deployment tool that we're going to take a look at a little bit later. And you can take advantage of this, and you can use all the symbology configurations and tools that I'm going to show you today. So we're going to start off looking at the basic data structure of the utility network. So if I can direct you to the right side of my screen here in our catalog pane, we can see our water database SDE connection. This is an enterprise database connection like many of you will be familiar with. And then within that, we have a feature data set. Utility network data lives within a feature data set, just like a geometric network has done in the past. So then below that, we have our service territory feature and our structure features, our structure boundary, structure junction, structure lines. So these are all features that are common across all utility networks, regardless of the domain. And when I say domain, I mean water, stormwater, gas, electric. So they all have these structure features. And these are features that resources do not flow through, but may be attached to other features in the network. For water, an example might be like a meter pit or like a pad. A good example of one of these is in electric, this would be like a utility pole. You have lots of features connected to these poles, and you may want to track them and have them return in analysis results, but no resources are actually flowing through those. So in addition to that, we have our utility network database item itself, which contains all the topology, connectivity between features, and our rules, and all the things that make the utility network do what it does. Then below that, we have our domain-specific features. We have our water assemblies, devices, junctions, lines, and subnet lines. The subnet lines are our subnetwork features. We're going to take a look at those in a minute. And these are all the features that come out of the asset package that Jason was talking about earlier. These are the domain-specific features for your utility network. You may notice that there's only 5 feature classes that make up all your domain-specific asset data, and you may think that that seems like a very few number. And now this is designed like this on purpose. Like historically, you may have 20, 30, 40 different layers for your assets, but what they've done is they've parsed it down to only 5 feature classes, and this makes things run in a much more performant fashion. When you're doing querying, when you're running traces, or even just panning and zooming a map, it's going to run much faster. This is especially because we're in a services-based environment. So making this utility network run as efficiently as possible was really crucial. Now we're going to take a look to see how this relates to our asset groups and asset types that we can view in our table of contents over here. So you can see that we have our water device, junction assemblies, all these equivalent layers to our feature classes are over here. But if we expand our water device layer, we can see that it's parsed out into a number of different sublayers. And the way this is being handled is through subtypes and what we in the utility network, what we refer to as asset groups. So in ArcGIS Pro gives us the functionality of parsing these out and allowing us to turn them on and off and create labels and set scale dependencies and symbology and kind of treat them as if they were individual layers, although they are all coming out of a single feature class. Say we take a look at our pump asset group here and we expand that, we can see that it is further subdivided into asset types. So this is just a second tier of subdivision. So for our pumps, we have pumps of the type booster, chemical, or primary. And if we look at our flow valves, we can see that is divided into asset types with air gap, altitude, and check valve. If we open our attribute table for our pumps, we can see these fields that are really doing all this parsing for us. We have our asset group field, which again is a subtype field, and then we have further parsing things out is this asset type field. Okay, with that, I wanted to take a look at the data source for these layers. As Jason mentioned, this is a service-based architecture, and I just wanted to really hone in on this to show that you're truly hitting a URL REST service point. You are not connecting directly to the enterprise database. This is a URL that is being managed through Portal and Enterprise for ArcGIS. Another thing that Jason mentioned was versioning. If we click on our data source, we get our data source versioning. Contextual data tab can appear, and we can see all the things that we can do with our new branch versioning. We can manage versions, we can add and delete versions, we can change ownership of versions. As we complete our work, our editing work within a version, we can reconcile and post. If you have multiple editors and they're posting conflicting edits, there's a conflict manager that you can use to decide which edits you want to go with. And then you can also, since no features in the utility network are truly ever deleted, being deleted is just a state of on or off in a table, you can go back to historical moments excuse me, in your data and set a date and see the state of your network at any given time, which can be really handy. Okay, now that we've looked at that, I want to take a look at some of the basic modeling functionality of the utility network. So here in our example data, we're in our Naperville, Illinois water distribution utility network example data, and we're looking at a pump station. And as you can see the valves and pumps and tanks that go around the perimeter of this, but we don't see anything that's actually inside. And this is actually really nice because as we zoom out, it keeps our maps looking clean. But with this idea of containment, we can go inside this pump station facility and actually see the features that are contained within it. So as I enter containment, I can go in and I can see that I have junctions and valves and pumps and meters and flow valves. And then if I zoom in a little bit more on this area, you might notice that we have a meter that appears to be sitting off the network. It appears to not be connected in line with our other assets. But actually we're using what's known as an association, a connectivity association, to connect the meter to this flow valve. And if I turn on my view associations tool, it will show us a graphical representation of that connectivity between this meter and this flow valve. Now, this is not a true line. There is only a logical association between these two features. It's just a graphical representation. And then further, if I want to dig in a little bit more and see a little bit more information about our associations, I can open my Modify Associations pane. And since I'm in the containment section, it's showing me a list of all these features of this container that I'm in. These are all the features that have a containment association to this pump station. And I can also go in and check these on and off for the visibility to make them visible when you're within or without of the container. Now, if I go to my connectivity associations and I choose to select my junction, which in this case is my flow valve point, I can see that it has this association to my pump station meter. And this is how you set up these associations as well. Further, with our flow valve, we can see that it has a terminal and that it's set to the inlet port, which is on this side. And now the terminals define the directionality of flow of resources through these controlling features like valves. And so in this case, our flow direction is being set to being left to right across the map view based on the terminal configurations on this valve. Okay, with that, I want to exit my container, and we're going to take a look at some editing tools that are available in the water distribution editor map that can help you get your work done a bit more efficiently. So we're going to just go next door into this area over here and say that we have a new hydrant assembly that we need to add. And typically you might need to go in and add a T and add a lateral and add a valve and other associated features with that hydrant, as well as the hydrant itself, and set a myriad of attributes. Well, there are a number of group feature templates that are available in this editing map, and one that we can take advantage of is this fire hydrant with service in valve. So it has basically strung together a series of feature templates so we can very quickly and easily create this feature and its associated other features. So I grab my construction tool, and as I hover over the map, I see that I'm getting a snapping tip that appears as I hover over my water main. Now, this is telling me something. This is telling me that I have a rule in place, an editing rule that allows me to actually make this connection between this type of T and the main. If I did not have a rule in place, I would not get this snapping tip. So this assures me that my edits are going to be appropriate. So with that, I can click once to connect to the main, click once to drop the location of the valve, and then double click to add the hydrant itself. So now with that construction tool, it's gone in and created all those features for me. They're all snapped together nicely, and any default attributes that I may have defined in my feature template will also be dropped and added to save me even additional time there. You can even go in and add additional information like an install date and the asset ID. So you may notice that there are some large purple polygons that have appeared on our map. Well, these are called dirty areas. And what this is telling me is that although I've geometrically added these features into my point and line feature classes, they are not incorporated into the network topology. So if I was to run, say, a trace on one of these would not be included in that trace result because they're not included in my underlying network topology. So to do a check, all you simply have to do is go to our network topology tools and choose to validate these areas. And again, since I used my construction tool, everything is well snapped together, well connected, and abiding by all the appropriate rules. So we are in good shape, and it approved it and did not give me any error features when I ran that validation. Okay, now let's take a look at another thing that Jason talked about, which is a sub-network. So let's go, we're going to zoom out a little bit to see most of the extent of our network here. And what we're looking at here are some pressure zone subnetworks that are defined by having different colors on the map. And between each of these pressure zones are subnetwork controllers, are pressure reducing valves that have a high and a low side, and that define where these subnetworks begin and end. A useful thing with these subnetworks is that you can go in and you can define pretty much anything that you would want to have as a summary, to have summary information, to know information that's readily available for your subnetwork. Things like how many hydrants are within that subnetwork, how many service valves, what is the total length of a given type of main with a given type of material in your main. You can know where your subnetwork controllers are, things like that. So with that, the last thing I wanted to show is a little quick analysis example. And if we can go to a specific area here, we're going to look at an example where, say you had some work planned and you needed to go out in the field and you needed to turn off some valves to isolate an area. Say you were like replacing some valves, or you had to go replace a length of main you knew was in need of repair. You can use the new valve isolation trace tool in ArcGIS Pro to call out those valves for you. So I've launched my trace tool ahead of time here. Our trace type is isolation. The domain network we've chosen is water. Our tier is system. That's just the sort of generic overall tier. And then the one thing that we did have to define was one of these filter barriers, where it tells our trace where to stop, basically. And we have a network category. There are a thing in the utility network called network categories that kind of group features together for the sake of analysis. And you have our category is isolating. So all the different types of valves have been added to this category known as isolating. So instead of having to go in and choose 10, 15 different types of valves, we just can use this category to quickly define that group. So with that, we have our configuration set up. We're going to add a starting point for our trace. This is the area where we're going to do our work. And then we're going to go back and we're going to run our trace. So it's going to kick out in every direction and try to find the valves that are needed to isolate this area. And I'll point out at the end that it's actually going to ignore some valves that would not have an effect because the area is already isolated. So here we see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 valves that we need to go out in the field and turn. And you can notice like we have some valves on the cul-de-sac here that are ignored and not returned because that one would obviously not need to be returned or turned to isolate this area because it's already isolated. Okay, with that, that's a brief overview of the data structure and the modeling capabilities and some of the analysis tools available with the utility network. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jason.
Great. Thanks, Matt. I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about configuring the utility network and some of the tools that are available to do that. When you first start out thinking about the utility network and configuring it, it's going to be important for you as an organization to really figure out the right level of detail for the business. Not everybody's going to need to do all of the things that Matt showed right away with containment and association. So really there's a couple of things. One is to upgrade to the most recent ArcGIS Enterprise and ArcGIS Pro. I mentioned early on that the utility network was available at 10.6, but if you're just starting out, we would really recommend that you implement the most current version of ArcGIS Enterprise and ArcGIS Pro. Now, this really shouldn't be done initially in your production GIS environment. We would really highly recommend that you stand up a development environment to do this in without impacting your existing workflows, your existing GIS production work. And then either gain new capabilities and increase the level of detail, like what we've shown, or it's possible just to maintain the equivalent capabilities and level of detail that you had with the geometric network and ArcMap, and just take advantage of some of the additional capabilities of ArcGIS Pro, and then gradually increase capabilities and detail as the organizational needs see fit. And also really encourage people to look at partner solutions that will add and expand the core capabilities of the utility network. Now it comes back down to these four steps, really. The first step, create and configure your utility network, post-process and publish out the feature layer that's going to power everything, and then deploy solutions on top of the utility network. And then share out those maps and apps for others in your organization. And this is really an iterative process. This process you're going to keep coming back because Esri will continue to release new solutions built on top of the utility network, and you can deploy those and share those and get feedback and come back and maybe make some changes. One of the solutions I want to highlight is called the Water Distribution Utility Network Foundation. And this is really the starting place for you when you're starting to look at the utility network. And it comes with a couple of key things. The first thing it comes with is the schema. We also call that really the asset package. And that's what defines the utility network as either a water, wastewater, or a stormwater network. It also includes some maps to help you publish out the services that will power this. And then it also includes a pro map for publishing out the services that will be used in viewing applications. And this includes all of the rich symbology that you've seen throughout the demonstration. So Esri provides that symbology for the utility network as part of these solutions. I'm going to turn it back over to Matt, and he's going to quickly walk through what this foundation really looks like.
Okay, thanks, Jason. So as Jason was saying, that it's a good idea to take some time to stand up example utility networks, either with example data or with your own data in a development environment. So what I'm going to do is walk through a very high level quick overview of what that would entail. So we begin on the ArcGIS Solutions for Water Solutions page, and we have solutions for water delivery, sewer collection, and stormwater conveyance. We have utility network domain models for all three of these. Our example that we've been working with is water delivery, and we're going to stick with that. So as we enter that page, we'll see the solutions gallery that has all the solutions that we have available for you to download and use. And I would encourage everybody to get familiar with what is available on this page. Again, what we are interested in today is the Water Distribution Utility Network Foundation solution. So we're going to go on to that page, and it gives us an overview about what is included. It describes that there's a pro project package that is deployed to your organization, and it includes an asset package with example data that you can choose to deploy or not. It also gives you some additional information about considerations and software versions and things to take into consideration when setting up one of these example utility networks or even a real one. So also on this page, it's very valuable is this Getting Started tab that gives you step-by-step instructions on how to set up a utility network. So that you could walk through these example, or these steps rather, to set up a utility network in a development environment with our example data, and that will get you familiar with the process. And then later, when it's time to deploy your actual production utility network, the process is exactly the same. It's just when you add the asset package, you'll be using your own data instead of that example data. So once you're ready to get started, the first thing you're going to do is go into ArcGIS Pro, and you'll want to use the ArcGIS Solutions Deployment Tool. Now, if you don't have this already, it is a simple download from Esri. Just close Pro, run the exe, install it. It takes 2 seconds, and then open Pro, and it will be available on the Share tab here for you. But it is not core, so you will need to install it. So once you launch it, you'll have a couple of options, and you're going to be interested in the Deploy in ArcGIS Solutions option there. And it's going to show you all the different industries that we have solutions available for. And we are interested in the utility network, and it shows us all the different domains that we have for the utility network. We have electric and gas, sewer, stormwater, and again, our water distribution that we are interested in today. Now, I've already deployed them because this is what I've been showing you today, and so we see these green check marks that tells us that we've already deployed these. The first thing you would do is deploy this water distribution utility network, and what that's going to do is going to publish that project package to your ArcGIS enterprise organization, and it's going to look like this. So once you have that, you'll simply just download it and open it, and it will unpack it into your packages folder. You'll have your Pro project, and then you'll be ready to begin. Once you have that done, you will, in that Pro project, you will run through steps that are outlined in the Getting Started page you'll create an enterprise database, you'll create the utility network, you'll import the example data asset package for the water domain, and then you'll set it all up. And in the end, what you'll have will look like this. And you will have your utility network data. It will have this black symbology, a little different than the editing map. And then you'll be ready to publish this to your enterprise portal. Just to point this out, we looked at the data source of our editing map earlier, and that was a service URL. But here, this is a traditional SDE direct connection to our enterprise database. So we're not to the point where this is truly a service running through portal. It's still just a straight database connection. But then once you publish this to your org, then you will have your water distribution feature layer. You'll also publish the water distribution simple network map, and this is what powers the network viewer application. So you have all these things published. You will then go back to the solution deployment tool and deploy the network editor map project package, which again, you'll interact with that the same way. You'll download it, unpack it, connect it to your service that we have, our feature layer service here. And then also, you'll also launch your web app for your viewer. And like the viewer will look like this, and it will have everything symbolized nicely like this for you. That's all taken care of through the solution. And then lastly, you will end up back kind of where we started with our water distribution editor map. And again, if you use our example data, you will have exactly what I've been showing you, and you can walk through some of these workflows and get yourself familiar with the utility network. So just in synopsis, I'd say please check out the Esri Water Solutions page and familiarize yourself with those solutions. Install the solution deployment add-in for Pro, then deploy the utility network to a development environment, including the example data if you like, and then you can begin to familiarize yourself with the utility network and work through some of the things I've shown you here today. With that, I'm going to turn this back to Jason to finish us off.
Great, thanks, Matt. Now, I know Matt and I have thrown a lot of information at you guys over the last several minutes here. Many of you might be feeling a bit overwhelmed. Please don't worry. Esri has a lot of resources for you for help. I was looking at the questions. There's tons of questions, and we'll try to get to those here in a couple minutes. But Esri has utility network consulting services that are available to help you with implementation planning, doing a pilot proof of concept, data migration workshops, as well as data health checks. That was a lot of the questions that were coming in, is what do I need to do now with my existing data? And so we can help you by looking at doing some data health checks and understanding the current state of your data, what will need to be done to that data prior to going through a migration. Now, Esri also has a wealth of utility network training. There is an instructor-led training course specifically on configuring the utility network. It walks through that foundation that Matt just showed, and really the whole process for standing up a utility network and applying the Esri supplied asset package. We also have self-paced web courses to help you understand the utility network, along with ArcGIS Pro. So that's another big one. If organizations haven't started migrating to ArcGIS Pro, you're going to really want your users to learn and understand Pro prior to doing this migration. And there's also Learn tutorials that will help with some of that as well, along with training seminars. Krista posted the white paper. We've got several different white papers on the utility network. There's one specifically for water, and it also covers some things that you need to think about as an organization prior to looking at migrating over to the utility network. And then lastly is the help documentation. There's help documentation on the solutions that we described, and there's a wealth of help documentation on the utility network itself and ArcGIS Pro, all to help you really understand the complexity of the utility network. And then lastly, Esri has a whole community of business partners. And some of these business partners have achieved or earned what we call the Utility Network Management Specialty. So this is a designation that they've earned that really exposes them as a leader in utility network. So you can be assured that they've been vetted through Esri and they've actually earned this designation. So they understand the utility network. It can also help you with many of these other things as well. So with that, I want to also just end with the fact that there are a wealth of resources at Esri to help you with this. We are available to answer your questions. We're going to try to get through as many of the questions that were posted as we can, but post-seminar here, certainly reach out to Esri. We'll be happy to answer your questions. We're really happy to help you figure out next steps and point you to additional resources to help you with your journey through this. One resource is this URL at the bottom. We've tried to put together a collection of white papers and just important resources and things there. So I'll pause so anybody can snap a quick photo and then go visit that as well. We'll also try to provide that post-seminar. So at this point, I am going to turn it back over to Krista, and we will wrap up and answer some questions.
Thanks, Jason. For those of you looking for those resources, I've created a bit.ly link that'll get you there a little quicker if you don't want to type in the longer link. If you took the photo, great, that also works. As Jason said, we do have a lot of questions that have come in during the webinar. We have about 5 or 6 minutes, so we will not be able to get to all of them, but we will get to as many as we can. Just as a reminder, those of you that did ask, we are recording this webinar. It will be made available on our Water Team webinars page. The link to that page is in the GoToWebinar follow-up email. You'll get that in about an hour after the webinar ends. It'll take us a week, maybe a little longer, to get the webinar posted online. So if you wanted to watch it again or share it with colleagues, give us at least a week, and then you can look for it online. Let's get started with some of the questions. Jason, I know you talked about licensing, you talked about different products and versions that are needed. We did get a couple questions asking about customers that have enterprise license agreements. Are any of the software components needed for utility network part of that type of a license?
Very good question. So again, just to reiterate, the Utility Network Management extension is an extension to ArcGIS Enterprise. It's licensed like the additional extensions, so it's licensed by cores. You really just need to check with your Esri representative to see. Some of our enterprise agreements did negotiate that in. Our small agreements don't include that, but there may be some additional purchasing options. So I'm going to defer that question to the individual account managers and account executives. So if you're interested, please reach out to your account person and discuss that with them.
Thanks, Jason. We also had several questions back to the licensing again. This is more specific to products. You were showing ArcGIS Pro. Is there a minimum licensing level you need for Pro in order to use the utility network?
Yeah, so you need to have a standard level Pro license, kind of similar to what you needed with the geometric network with ArcMap. So you do need to have a standard level Pro license, and then again, you do need to have ArcGIS Enterprise.
Great, thank you. We had several questions about the attribute rule framework that's shown in the webinar. Does this replace the attribute assistant in ArcMap? Is it comparable? How would you describe the newer framework in ArcGIS Pro?
Sure. Yeah, it really is the replacement for the attribute assistant. I'd encourage users to read the white paper. There's a little section in there in the white paper that covers this specifically. But yes, I mean, in general, that is the goal, is to replace that functionality through attribute rules. Now, as it is today, it's not a one-to-one. Not everything that was in the attribute assistant is available in attribute rules, but we're continuing to build with each release of the asset package, building in those attribute rules. And then using Arcade, users can build their own attribute rules as well.
Thanks. Our next question is specific to servers. I know you mentioned having a server dedicated to the utility network extension. Why is this required, or is it not required? It's just a recommendation.
It's not required. So if you're a small organization and you have a base deployment of ArcGIS Enterprise and you're only serving out a couple of users, it's certainly possible. You can license the Utility Network Management extension on that ArcGIS Enterprise. We just really are recommending that you, for workload separation and other reasons, that you have a separate GIS server specific to your utility network. But that's really just a best practice recommendation. It's not a requirement.
Thanks for clarifying. We had some questions about the utility network and how it's an enterprise level application. Because of the way it's architected and deployed, are you able to expose the utility network database to other business systems and make some integrations?
Yes. Yeah, that was really the focus, part of the focus anyways, for making this a services-based approach, is that now utility network information is exposed as a REST service. So it should be, relatively straightforward to be able to get access to that service through our REST APIs and other things to begin to exchange information through other business systems via the REST services.
Thanks. And that would include hydraulic modeling software or partner software that might integrate with us as well?
That is true, right. So, pulling in that information from the REST service. Now that kind of gets into a whole other discussion that's probably a bit out of scope for this particular discussion, but for those that are interested in the hydraulic modeling aspect, I would talk to your vendor and you can also talk with us offline.
Thanks, Jason. We had a couple questions about schematics. Is there a way in the utility network to provide a schematic view of your system?
Yeah, it's built right in. So those network diagrams are a core component to the utility network. And so there's a whole set of tools for building out and exposing those schematic diagrams.
Great. And this one was asked a lot by our attendees. What does migration look like? If we have the geometric network in ArcGIS, ArcMap, how do they migrate to utility network in ArcGIS Pro? Are there tools? What should they be thinking about? A lot of questions about migration, Jason.
Yeah, no, really, really good question. I know that's really on the front of everybody's mind. As far as migration goes, there are a couple of tools that are available. Esri just released a preview set of tools out on GeoNet specific for data migration. It can really be used for any data migration, but it was designed with going from the local government information model and geometric network into the utility network. So those tools are out available on GeoNet. They're Python tools that will run inside ArcGIS Pro. There are also some other tools out on GeoNet that were co-developed by Esri and Safe Software that are designed to run in FME or the data interoperability. Those are a bit more sophisticated. So if you've modified outside of the local government information model quite a bit and you want to modify the asset package and things, you might take a look at those tools. Again, they do require a pretty in-depth knowledge of the FME workbenches, but those are both available. I would also encourage users to read the white paper. There's some really good guidance in there about what you need to be thinking about and doing now prior to migration. And then lastly is those are really more in-depth conversations that really depend on the individual utility. So please reach out to Esri and to our partners, and we'd be happy to help you.
Thanks a lot, Jason. We had a few questions about ArcGIS Online. Are customers able to run the UN in ArcGIS Online?
So ArcGIS Online does not support the utility network at this time, so meaning that it doesn't support the utility network functionality. It would be possible to register the feature services and expose those through web maps, but you wouldn't have really any functionality at this point for a utility network. It is something that's been talked about to be developed. I don't have a lot of information on that at this time. But certainly check back with us at a later date.
Okay, and we're gonna do one more question. There were several attendees that were interested in test driving the utility network. Are there any testing options set up where they could just get their hands on it without having to have the licensing or set it up in their enterprise environment?
Not that I'm aware of at this point. Now, the solutions team has put together a series of story maps, and there's a lot of resources out there, so you can get a lot of good information about the utility network. It's not necessarily all going to be hands-on with the utility network, but there, just to remind people, we do have developer licensing available, so you could get a developer license and start utilizing the utility network with the sample data as it is today without having to purchase a full-blown production level license for this. So it's a much lower entry cost to just get started.
Thanks a lot, Jason. And I'm sorry to say we're out of time. For those of you that are still on the webinar, please do complete the survey when it ends. We really appreciate it. We hope to see you in 2 weeks for our second utility network webinar. Have a great day.